Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Om Jnanatimirandhasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Jena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. So welcome everyone to the second day of the seminar on Srila Jiva Goswami. Thank you all for coming, both those present in person and those in the Akasha. Welcome to everyone. I was saying yesterday how the problem with the material world is that everything is so temporary, and yet it's one thing that seems permanent about the Bay Area is its beautiful weather. I don't know if that is the case, but every time I visit it, it seems to be just perfect. So it's really nice to be here again. What I've had passed around to you here is an overview of the Sandarbhas. This is basically, it served as an appendix in my dissertation to give readers a broad overview of what the Sandarbhas are talking about. So hopefully it's useful in some way. It's not really a handout to be read during the class, and so I don't think it'll be of much use if we put it up on the screen to the distance students. So today's topic is going to be Vedanta philosophy, and particularly Jiva Goswami's Vedanta philosophy as he presents it near the end of Paramatma Sandarbha, the third of 6 Sandarbhas that we discussed yesterday. It was very important to cover what we covered yesterday in order to get to this point of being able to speak of Vedanta, because a lot of the foundation or groundwork with the concept of Bhagavan that we discussed yesterday, as well as Bhagavan's Shakti or his energies, and the nature of Srimad Bhagavatam, and Jiva Goswami's overall strategy in the Sandarbhas of trying to identify the Bhagavatam, connect the Bhagavatam with Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's philosophy. That discussion of strategy and of key concepts was very, very important in order to then discuss more of the details of what Vedanta philosophy is, and how Jiva Goswami engages with it. Now, the word Vedanta refers really, in its most direct sense, to the Upanishads. Vedanta is actually a synonym for the Upanishads. But in then a secondary sense, it comes to mean the system of philosophy that's based on the Upanishads, that's grounded on them, and also the Bhagavad Gita. Now, the Vedantic tradition itself is well over 1,000 years old, at least dating back to the time of Shankaracharya in the 8th or 9th century, like that, so well over 1,000 years, and even before that, because he's quoting other authors, his own guru Gaudapada and others before that, whose works are not widely read and most of which we don't have anymore, but nevertheless it's clear that the tradition of Vedanta philosophy is very ancient. And even though there are 6 systems of classical philosophy in India, there's no doubt that of them Vedanta philosophy has been triumphant. It's really been the most widely studied, and the only ones that come even close to Vedanta in terms of their influence are Sankhya and to some extent yoga. And so in fact every Acharya since the time of Shankaracharya has found it essential to engage with the Vedantic tradition by providing a commentary on the Brahma Sutras, or also known as the Vedanta Sutras, which are written by Srila Vyasadeva as a sort of aphorisms or summaries of the teachings of the Upanishads. So the Vedanta Sutras, it's usually best to think of them as kind of hooks upon which a teacher can hang their various explanations and elaborations, and which the student can use to remember those elaborations. If you try to just understand the Vedanta Sutra on its own, it's next to impossible. The first sutra is fairly clear, the second one is fairly clear, and from then on it starts becoming very, very unclear. So they're really meant, the idea behind the sutras is they're meant as little folders, they're meant as hooks, places, repositories where explanations can be given. And the commentary in Vedanta Sutra has been the main method by which an acharya will explain his philosophy to his own followers and to the rest of the world. It's a very outward-looking document. It's not written just for in-house people. And so if you want to know what Ramanujacharya has said, and you lived 500 years ago, you would go straight to the Sri Bhashya. This was the main place where you found it, his commentary on Vedanta Sutra. Same thing if you want to know about Shankaracharya, you'd go to the Sharirika Bhashya, his commentary on Vedanta Sutra, and so on. So that's kind of been the basis for Vedantic discussion. Now, our Sampradaya really did not have a commentary on Vedanta Sutra, a complete commentary, until the time of Baladev Vidyabhushana, which is very late. It's the late 18th century. And there was one good reason for this, philosophically, why no one in our Sampradaya, despite the immense literary output that our Sampradaya has offered, no one bothered to write a commentary, a complete commentary in Vedanta Sutra. What is the reason behind that? Can anyone say? Yes. Yes. Srimad Bhagavatam is the ultimate commentary on Srimad Bhagavatam. Srimad Bhagavatam is the ultimate commentary on Vedanta Sutra. Okay? And Mahaprabhu felt this very strongly, and he was not the first to say this, actually. Means even Madhvacharya in his Bhagavata Tatparya Nirnaya, he quotes this verse from the Garuda Purana, which says, Arthoyam Brahma Sutranam, that this Bhagavatam presents the meaning of the Vedanta Sutra. So it's a very long-standing ancient tradition, but Jiva Goswami was the first person in history to try to actually demonstrate this point, to actually take several of the sutras of Vedanta Sutra and show how the Bhagavatam provides the best explanation for those sutras. And a lot of devotees don't realize this. I mean, very few scholars realize it. But even devotees don't realize the fact that Jiva Goswami gave us the beginnings of a commentary in Vedanta Sutra by commenting on the first 5 sutras of Vedanta Sutra at the end of his Paramatma Sandarbha. And there we find Jiva Goswami giving us a wonderful commentary, but also in essence saying, look, I've shown you that the Bhagavatam is really the meaning of Vedanta Sutra. I've showed you that, now go read Srimad Bhagavatam. Right? And so it's that, with that mood that he's trying, like I was saying yesterday, to not really reinvent the wheel when it's not necessary. He just says, okay, I've demonstrated this point that Mahaprabhu made. The Bhagavatam is it. That's the commentary in Vedanta Sutra. If you're convinced by it now, then go study Srimad Bhagavatam. And that's, of course, what he's doing in the Sandarbhas. Now, what is our view, regardless of whether there's a commentary or not on Vedanta Sutra? The point is we engage with Vedantic questions and provide answers as much as any other school of Vedanta philosophy. It's very important because the questions that Vedanta philosophy raises are the essential questions that we ask and we answer and we discuss with others. These are actually the questions of philosophy. And so here's a handout of just a little study aid that I made up here, which are Vedanta in a nutshell. You've got the 4 key questions of Vedanta philosophy. And these go as follows. What is the nature of ultimate reality? And that's purposefully generic or vague, because the answer as to what that ultimate reality is, we can't really say God, because that's up for debate. Next is, who are we? So what is ultimate reality? Then what is our nature? Then the third is, what is the world? What is the nature of the world around us? And finally, how do we achieve liberation from the world? This fourth question is really crucial, because one of the features of philosophy in India, in general, is that if that philosophical system cannot provide a practical method for relieving human suffering and attaining perfection, then that philosophical system is worth nothing. And the biggest criticism, the biggest defeat you can give to any philosophical system is to show that it is ineffective. It's not to show that it is incoherent or it's wrong or it doesn't make sense. In fact, things that are contradictory are present in all philosophical systems. Sometimes they're glorified and they're called achintya. But that's not really the problem, that the human mind can't grasp ultimate reality. It's that if it doesn't render a practical process for getting out, then what's the point, right? And so the split between religion and philosophy, which is so common in the West today, where philosophy departments around the United States or Western Europe will not come close to the question of religion. That type of split, that Cartesian split, is a product of European Enlightenment, and it does not exist around the world. In fact, it didn't even exist in the West prior to this, to the period of the Enlightenment. And so there's always, throughout Indian history, been a marriage between the practical concerns of religion and faith to relieve human suffering and point people in the direction of eternal life and happiness, and the theoretical questions of philosophy that provide the groundwork, the basis for actually doing that. So that fourth question is not a kind of an optional add-in there to an otherwise pure philosophy. This is actually essentially part of the whole system of Vedanta. Now, with these four questions, you have a variety of different answers. And what I've done is given two columns, non-dualists and dualists, which are non-dualist means Advaita and dualist means Dvaita. These I'm not referring to particular schools. Even though all I can do here is give you two columns, it's best to think of non-dualism and dualism as a spectrum, as a long line, with radical dualism on one end, represented most closely by Madhvacharya, and radical non-dualism on the other end, represented most effectively by Shankaracharya. And then a number of philosophies that find themselves somewhere in this spectrum, tending more towards the dualism, more towards the non-dualism, trying to strike a perfect balance. So think of it as a spectrum. And then you can place philosophies, even not the classical philosophies, even philosophies that you read in the West, you can kind of place them on this spectrum and say, well, here are some ways in which that philosophy is dualistic, but here's where it renders itself impersonalistic. And like that. So instead of thinking of it as two opposing poles, which is kind of how it comes out here. Now, the key concern with Vedanta philosophy is to say the answers to these questions are found. The common assumption, that's not the key question, the common assumption of Vedanta philosophy that all Vedantists agree on, and it's the basic requirement to be a Vedantist, basically, is that the answer to these questions can be found in the Upanishads and the Bhagavad Gita and the Vedanta Sutra. That there is a set of knowledge, a Shabda Pramana, it's revelation, through which we can answer these questions. If one doesn't accept this, then we can still discuss, but then it's not a Vedantic discussion. Then it's a different kind of discussion, in the way that Vedantists would do with Buddhists, for example, or Jains, who don't accept the same pramanas, the same basis of knowledge. And really, the question of, the concern of Vedantists is not to answer these questions out of a hat, to produce the answers out of thin air, but really to say that the scriptures provide answers to these questions. But there are so many opposing, apparently contradictory statements in Scripture. How do we reconcile them? And so each Acharya, Shankara, Ramanuja, Madhva, Jiva Goswami, has presented a philosophical system that claims to best reconcile the apparently contradictory statements in the Shastras and say, look, this philosophy really brings it all together. It brings together these opposing statements, it brings together a human experience and our practical experience. It gives us a practical path for achieving liberation. It really brings it all together. It resolves these contradictions. That's, in many ways, the sole task of the Vedanta philosopher, is to resolve the contradictions or apparent contradictions of Scripture. Because the answers are already there. They really... You don't need to invent the answers. The assumption is they're present, they're revealed. It's just that there's more than one answer, or they're unclear answers. So clarifying that, resolving them, reconciling them, that's the task. And there's two contradictions that are the toughest, okay, that vex, that every Vedantist will struggle with. And here's what they are. The first contradiction has to do with the relationship between, with the nature of God. Is he personal? Or is he impersonal? And the second question, the second contradiction that needs to be resolved, is the relationship between God and the world. I mean the material world. But also the living entities within that world. So, these two problems. The difficulty is that Shastra provides on first reading multiple statements for each of these contradictions, and one struggles with trying to resolve them. So let's look at each one of these in turn and see what Jiva Goswami does, what Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's philosophy offers as a resolution. The name for the complete resolution of these problems is Achintya Bheda Bheda. So just so you know, that's from yesterday, that's where we are at today. As I said, we talk about Achintya Bheda Bheda. But Achintya Bheda Bheda is just a name for the philosophical system that reconciles these two issues, these two problems. But then let's also look at that and compare it with how other acharyas do it. So we see the merits of Mahaprabhu's approach. Okay? So first, the personal or the impersonal problem. As we know that there are statements in Scripture that say very clearly that the Lord is a person. There are other statements that stay with very clear statements that say that the Lord is impersonal. There's one definition of Bhagavan that Jiva Goswami quotes and likes very much from the Vishnu Purana, which describes Bhagavan as having many qualities, but among them is that the Lord is apanipada. He has no hands and he has no feet. And that's not a very uncommon thing in the scriptures to read. Or the Lord is nirguna, has no qualities, or has no form, he's arupa. Now, I know we can immediately jump to an explanation about those statements because we basically know the philosophy that I'm going to be talking about here. But let's not jump to that conclusion. Let's work to it so we can see how Jiva Goswami gets there. So we've got these contradictory statements and we need to figure out what to do with it. Now, every acharya needs to come up with some kind of a scheme, a method of explanation or interpretation. This is called hermeneutics, okay? It's a method of interpretation to resolve that contradiction. Some technique, some approach to do it. And our approach, Jiva Goswami's approach, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's approach, is the latter. Okay? The ladder of successive realization of God. with Bhagavan as the top rung of the ladder, Paramatma as the second rung, and the third rung being Brahman. Okay, let's run through these quickly. Bhagavan is, we've defined last time, okay, yesterday. We saw that wonderful definition, and his primary nature is that has Shakti, or qualities. So that's Bhagavan, that supreme, independent, wonderful person who is full of all qualities and attributes and powers. Then Paramatma is that same Bhagavan, but only when we look at him in relation to the material world. So Paramatma is that form of the Lord that is basically involved with all functions of this world. He deals with matters like time, with cause, creation, with living within the living entities and the material universe, entering them to provide them life. This is not a process that's necessary in the spiritual world because you don't have to give life to anything in the spiritual world. This is a distinctive feature of the material world that the Lord has to enter to animate it. So this is the role of Paramatma. And if you take the qualities of Paramatma and suppress them even further, so that you have no qualities visible whatsoever, then you get to Brahman. Then you get to Brahman, who is the Kevala Visheshya, who's the pure, unattributed reality. Now, what I was saying yesterday is this is a top-down approach, not a bottom-up approach. We do not begin with the idea that there is an ultimate abstract reality. And actually, that reality then manifests personality at certain times. Just like we present this idea, Bhagavan, Paramatma, Brahman. I've had the experience of speaking to those who are impersonalist in leaning, and they'll say, oh yeah, this is the same point, right? God is absolute, and he also displays personality. Sure, but the direction is wrong, right? What's implicit in the statement is, let's start here, add some personality to God, and you get Krishna. You take away that personality, you're back to Brahman. You add a different personality, you get Lord Ramachandra. You take it away, you add a different personality, you get Ganesha. You take it away, you're back to Brahman. So Brahman is it. That is it. And then we can add and subtract personality and get to whichever God we want. We can even get to ourselves like that, right? We just don't realize it. We add a certain type of personality and you get Radhika Ramandas. And this is the exact mode that we're not heading in, right? So the fact that we acknowledge God as a person and impersonal doesn't make us the same as other impersonalists who also will say God is a person and he's impersonal. It's how you get there that makes all the difference. For us, the ladder goes top down. Now, I know this analogy doesn't work very well then because no one climbs the ladder top down. We always go bottom up. But for us, it is a top down approach. We're descending, right? Or think of it like this. Krishna's coming down. So he traverses the ladder from the top to the bottom, right? He's already up there. He's on the roof. He comes down to us. We begin with Bhagavan. God is a person, he's full of attributes, he's full of qualities. This is who he is. Now, for specific purposes, the Lord hides or suppresses voluntarily some of his attributes in order to deal with us, in order to deal with the people of the material world and its functions. When he does that, suppresses a lot of his relationships, suppresses a lot of his qualities, he becomes Paramatma and focuses exclusively on the maintenance and animation of this material world. If then we were to suppress the Lord's qualities further, or he were to do this, in order to simply provide an all-pervading presence throughout all of creation, that becomes the Kevala Visheshya, the pure, unattributed reality which is Brahman. But that unattributed reality, as Krishna so clearly says in Gita, Brahmano hi pratishtaham, is entirely dependent on its source. In other words, that the minute the suppression is not happening, Krishna's full quality blossoms. And as we know from scripture, Krishna is unable to suppress his qualities in the presence of his pure devotees. When the devotees see him, they recognize him for who he is, and then the attempt to remain Paramatma or remain even more abstract is forgotten. It's impossible to do, right? So it's a fire that's suppressed with great difficulty, and with the slightest provocation, the Lord's full beauty and power blossoms. Right? It emerges in Lord Ramachandra and Lord Nrsimha. It emerges in Krishna and all these Leela avatars of the Lord. So Bhagavan, top down, not bottom up. This is a key difference between us and impersonalist philosophy. We are saying that God is all three. He's impersonal, yes. He's personal, yes. He's in between, yes. But the direction makes all the difference. Okay. Now, personal, impersonal. This is, like I was saying earlier, the fundamental challenge is not to propound some idea, because, I could propound an idea with 6 ladder steps, and you could do one with 25, and we could come up with all. That's not the point of a Vedantist philosopher, to just come up with new ideas and categories. The only reason this is proposed, this ladder, is to do what? What did we say the purpose of this was? Reconcile apparently contradictory statements within Shastra. That's the only reason a Vedantist would come up with any kind of theory, because the answer is already there, it just needs to be clarified or reconciled. So, what is this useful for? As a hermeneutical tool, okay, this word again, hermeneutics, as a tool for explanation or interpretation of scripture. Why is it useful? Let's go back to that statement I mentioned earlier. The definition of Bhagavan that Jiva Goswami is so fond of from the Vishnu Purana includes a line which calls him apanipada, without hands and without feet, and arupa, without form. So this is a tough one. Here we've got a definition of Bhagavan, which is calling him things that we think is impersonal and not right, because Krishna has hands and feet, and he has a form. And Jiva Goswami has just proved that. He's argued for it in Bhagavat Sandarbha. But it's okay, right? Here we are at this rung of the ladder, and we're saying Bhagavan has no hands and feet. But what you do is you pass that statement down the ladder to Brahman. And you say, Bhagavan is actually Brahman, is he not? Yes, he is. Vadanti tat tattva vidas tattvam yajnanam advayam. It's a non-dual reality. This is one. We're not talking about 3 supreme beings here. It's one. So actually, that statement belongs, we're talking about Brahman. Bhagavan is the same as Brahman. Pass it down the ladder, and now things are comfortable. Yes? Because Brahman has no hands and feet, and he has no form. So that contradiction, using the ladder, we collapsed the ladder, identified Bhagavan with Brahman, then pulled the ladder apart with that statement in the right place. It's now describing Brahman. Suppose we have to do it the other way. Suppose we have a statement in Shastra, like we do, at the first sutra, Vedanta Sutra, Atato Brahma Jignasa. Now, therefore, let us inquire into Brahman. And Jiva Goswami says, well, what we really want to inquire into is not Brahman at all. We want to inquire into Bhagavan. This is the object of our inquiry. But that's okay. This is what that statement means. Why? Now, we've got a statement over here. Inquiry into Brahman. We collapse the ladder. Brahman is actually the same as Bhagavan, yes? So therefore, we can pass that statement up the ladder and say inquiry into Brahman, actually what it means is inquiry into Bhagavan. In this way, statements can be categorized and parsed and moved up and down the ladder as necessary to keep things in a comprehensible and non-contradictory fashion. Now, you could say, well, this is really looking like cheating. Here we are, it's kind of really convenient. Pass things up and down the ladder. When you've got a contradictory statement, say that actually that means Brahman. And when you've got one you need for Bhagavan, you say actually that means Bhagavan. And you could give other examples for Paramatma, and this is really nice and easy and kind of cheating. Are you really reconciling it? The only thing I can say in defense of what we do is that everyone else does it. every acharya has a mechanism that he uses in order to do the very same thing. Okay? To find a way to reconcile apparently contradictory statements in Shastra. Okay, well, just give me 5 minutes and then we'll pause for questions. So, take for example, Shankaracharya. He says that he acknowledges the fact that there are multiply apparently contradictory statements in this matter and other matters. Is God personal or impersonal? And other such crucial questions. So what he says, he develops a system of hermeneutics, of interpretation, which states basically that some statements in scriptures are more important than others. I don't know if you've ever heard the term Mahavakya. Mahavakya was a term that is coined by Shankaracharya to refer to certain key statements in the Upanishads. There's not a lot of them, maybe a dozen, maybe a couple dozen, that really provide the overarching message of the Upanishads. And every other statement needs to be interpreted, explained in relation to these big ones. And if it can't, then you need to do something to make it fit, right? And so Shankaracharya really kind of often hammers a square peg into a round hole for this reason, because this is his hermeneutical principle. So if one, for example, is Aham Brahmasmi, I am Brahman. It's a relatively clear statement, and even from our perspective, we'd have to admit, it's veering on the impersonalistic side. I am Brahman. He says this is a Mahavakya statement, which means when you find a statement like Nityo Nityanam Chetanas Chetananam Eko Bahunam, there's one eternal amongst the many, there's one conscious amongst the many consciousness, there's one amongst the many, and one is fulfilling the desires of the many, then we got to do something in order to explain it in relation to the fundamental Mahavakya, which is that one is, those many are actually the one. And so what he would say in a situation like that is this Nityo Nityanam is describing the conditioned state, where the distinction is still very much present. But in the liberated state, you realize Aham Brahmasmi, or something like that, he would explain. So he develops this system of Mahavakyas, which he uses, which at least is as much cheating as what we did. But probably more. And the reason for that is because Ramanujacharya, who was kind of the first major challenge to Shankaracharya, he starts off with a completely different assumption about scripture. He says, given the potentially contradictory statements in Shastra, all of them need to receive equal weight. I am not prepared to say that statement A is more important than statement B on no basis other than the fact that I think A is more important than B. And so he says, therefore, we're going to have to find a method of reconciliation that gives them the weight that the text itself gives them. If you've got 100 statements talking about personalism and 50 talking about impersonalism, there's going to be 50% or whatever that percentage is for your discussion has to be dealing with the impersonal side. And you can't just say, no, I'll explain those away, that I'm not interested. So what method he develops, we'll see in a few minutes actually when we address the second question. But this is sort of the first big nut to crack for every Vedantist. This is what vexes every philosopher of Vedanta is this one big question. Where do we lie on the spectrum of personalism and impersonalism? Before we go on to the second, any questions about this first one? Yes?
Hare Krishna, when you had mentioned that Tattva Brahma Jigyasa, would it make sense? I'm not sure, but this is what came to my mind, is that would it kind of imply that at least start inquiring about Brahman, and then you would, because it's easier to understand somebody when you have a relationship with them. So maybe you will evolve to Bhagavan's state, and you would start inquiring about how can I love or kind of a relationship with that something that doesn't exist. So maybe, yeah, there should be something that I can have a relationship with, like even with material things, you have kind of a relationship. So would that make sense?
Yes, I think that's a good way of looking at it. Even in that approach, you're still making the assumption that we eventually want to get to the point of Bhagavan, right? Because we would not at all find it satisfactory if that's where we stayed, right? If that was all there was. So the point is, at some point or another, we're going to have to move up the ladder. We're going to have to at least imply that, okay, start off with the impersonal now if you want, but eventually you're going to have to come to the Bhagavan realization. Yes, Prabhu.
Prabhuji, these contradictions which you mention in the Vedantic school, right? These are the ones which are now attacked by the proponents of the Abrahamic religions, saying that, okay, this is so contradictory, there's no clarity in that. But see, our religion, there is extremely clear that
Yes.
what it is. There are no contradictions, so nothing to reconcile.
Yes.
Right? So how can we defend against such attacks?
That's a really good question. In fact, that's going to be the final discussion of today's seminar, is the question of achintya, or inconceivability, and is that defensible or not, or is that just an embarrassment for us? Okay, so please hold on to that question. If you don't feel satisfied at the end, then please ask again. Who else did you have your hand up at some point? Okay, yes, Prabhu.
So you were initially talking about how the conflict between religion and philosophy has been there, right, because of European thoughts, right? And so I'm wondering, like in a university setting, first of all, like this is very easy to communicate among devotees, and in a university setting, how is this done? And more importantly, how is the structure between religion and philosophy? How is they separated out, like, and how is that? And what do you think it should be like? First of all, there shouldn't be any room for religion. But that's my view. I'm just want to get your point of view.
Well, most universities in the United States have both religion and philosophy departments. Sometimes they're even combined in one department, philosophy and religion. So it's not really a question of where they're housed institutionally, but more in the sense that they don't look eye to eye. They don't see themselves as doing the same thing. Sometimes they're in the same department, sometimes they're two departments in the same university. Either way, the point is the same. They don't see that they're engaged in the same task. They feel that they're engaged in different endeavors. Philosophy is the work of pure reason. It's the work of the mind, something you can get to without reference to anything in the world. And then religion is the realm of faith and belief. When reason stops to work or is voluntarily suspended, then you get religion. So that distinction, which both sides live with, is something that I'm not sure will change all of a sudden. But this is one of the reasons why courses on Oriental philosophy or Eastern philosophy, no one can figure out where to put them. Sometimes they're in philosophy departments, sometimes they're in religion departments. Most of the time, religious studies says they're ours. We will do it. Just because philosophers tend to be a lot more hard-nosed about what they're going to study. Because they see this element, that fourth question, they see it in every Indian philosophical system. How do we achieve liberation? They think, well, look, there's something here in terms of practice, in terms of belief, in terms of faith. This is not really our domain, it's religion. And so they will throw the philosophical side out with it to the religion department, which is fine with us because I'm housed in a religious studies department. This is where, in fact, all Indian philosophers, not all, but most have found themselves in the West today. There's some philosophy departments that are gradually changing and hiring philosophers within Indian philosophers within philosophy departments. So let's do one more question, Maharaj, and then we'll move on.
On this reconciling of apparently contradictory statements, for example, no hands and feet, no form, Prabhupada would sometimes say it means no material hands or feet or form,
Yes.
but he has spiritual.
Yes.
And same thing with this nirguna and saguna.
Yes.
Where does that come from in our tradition, or do you have any comment on this strategy?
Wonderful. Thank you. So that is another way, another Gaudiya Vaishnava way of reconciling this problem, is by introducing the point that one statement is in the context of material world, and so we're saying, material hands or feet, and others are absolute statements. We discussed yesterday when we talked about the nature of Bhagavan, and the two qualities were aprakrita and swabhavika. So Prabhupada makes the aprakrita point very often, that the Lord is non-material, is aprakrita. So whenever something about the Lord is denied, it's because the aprakrita aspect is denied. So that's very much represented within the tradition and with Jiva Goswami as well. This provides a very broad hermeneutical method, but that is, for that specific problem, the aprakrita one, I would say is as commonly, maybe even more commonly used for that specific issue of the material versus. It doesn't quite address the personal versus impersonal distinction. That contradiction is addressed more by the latter here. So let's move on. I know there are further questions, but I'll try to leave sufficient time at the end for questions or after the next part. But moving along here, question number 2, or contradiction number 2, was the relationship between God and the world. The world meaning the material world plus the living entities present within the material world. How do we reconcile this relationship? Now, here's why this is a problem. Krishna, or Brahman, everyone agrees, kind of the fundamental qualities of Brahman are Sat, Chit, and Ananda. He who is eternal and always existent, Sat. Chit, he who is completely aware, fully conscious, fully knowledgeable, with no trace of ignorance or darkness present. And one who is Ananda, namely joyful or blissful. These attributes are widely accepted. In fact, the impersonalists won't say they're attributes. They'll say this is Brahman. But anyhow, this is everyone agrees upon. Now the problem is this. You've got the material world. Here we are in a situation where we find plenty that is asat, achit, and nirananda. It is temporary, or at least in flux. It is achit, ignorant, dead, inert, not conscious, and nirananda, miserable. And what do we do about that? In other words, what do we do? How do we explain the fact that a miserable, unconscious, temporary world comes from an eternal, fully conscious, and blissful source, without saying that these qualities of misery and ignorance are found within God? We could say that the world is simply a different reality than the Lord. It does not exist within the Lord at all. It doesn't even come from the Lord. It just is. It's a different reality. But we already talked about this last time. What's the problem there? Right. Yeah, but if you had two permanent existing realities, you've got the problem of relativity, okay, that both realities become relative to each other, so there's no absolute reality anymore. And then you've got the potential of the one reality you think is God, not necessarily being God, right? There's a potential competition there for what is the ultimate reality. And that possibility is denied. We all agree on this, as in every Vedantist agrees on this point, that ekam eva advitiyam, there is one reality that subsumes the other, that contains the other. In that sense, you can say the Vedantic tradition as a whole is monistic, it's non-dualistic. Just on this point, that there is one reality. In fact, I think it's Anucheda 50 or 51, section 50 or 51 in Tattva Sandarbha, where it says really clearly, Jiva Goswami says this point. He quotes Vadanti tat tattvavidas tattvam yajnanam advayam. And he says, there is one reality and there is nothing but that one reality. Bas. Right? So this is a point all Vedantists agree upon. So what do you do? What do you do? Where do all the problems and miseries and ignorance and maya of this material world, where do they come from? And where do you put them? How do you explain their creation? If you explain it from the Lord, then you've got problems within the Lord. If you explain that it's still in the Lord, then it's even worse. And so this is an issue, okay? Now, here we create a second ladder. The first one was Brahman, Paramatma, and Bhagavan, our first tripartite category. But we have another triple category. Anyone know what that is? Can anyone guess? Yes. So the Lord's internal energy, His marginal energy, and His external. The Antaranga Shakti, the Tatastha Shakti, Antaranga Shakti, the spiritual world, and specifically Srimati Radharani or Lakshmi, the Tatastha Shakti, that's us, the marginal energy, and the external energy, Bahiranga Shakti, which is the world of matter. Each one of these is the Lord's energy, and in fact, it's one energy. The Lord has Shakti. This is His quality. It has Shakti. But that Shakti manifests in three different ways, depending on the level of distance between the Lord and His energy. Let's explain these three in a little more detail. Jiva Goswami provides the analogy of the sun. If you ever wondered, this beautiful analogy of the sunlight that Prabhupada speaks about many times, Jiva Goswami develops this in great detail in the Sandarbhas. And he describes it like this. The Lord is like the sun. The internal energy, the Lord's Antaranga Shakti, is like what? Yes, it's like the light present within the orb of the sun. In other words, it's so closely connected with the sun that there's just no way you're ever going to see the internal energy without seeing the Lord, or vice versa. There's no way you can see the light in the orb of the sun and say, I didn't see the sun. The marginal energy, on the other hand, is what? The sun rays. Still of the quality of the sun, the property of the sun, but thrown off from the sun's internal presence and hanging somewhere in between the sun itself in the sky and the earth. It's in between, it's marginal, it's tatastha, this way or that way. Some of this marginal energy is closer to the sun and some has already landed on the earth. Think of it that way. And then the external energy, the Bahiranga Shakti, is what? Well, all of this is sunlight. Almost. Almost. Shadow, cloud, reflection, exactly. Jiva Goswami says it's the reflection which still has some of the properties. Actually, shadow is given as another in other places. But here he's speaking of reflection. And I think reflection works very nicely because you see a reflection, it has some of the attributes of the sun, as in it looks like the sun. But it's missing some very key features, like heat. You're not going to, even if you're in the middle of a lake, just in the reflection, you're not going to feel the heat. You have to get the sun rays directly on you. But the most important thing about the reflection is that despite the fact that it looks like the sun itself, what happens if you throw a pebble into the reflection. It quivers, it changes, right? It has ripples. And you jump in yourself and you can destroy the reflection, right? And it might disappear altogether, or if a cloud shows up, it's gone. But only an ignorant person would say, the sun has been destroyed. When you throw the pebble and the reflection shakes, what's happening to the sun at the same time? Nothing, right? Is it trembling? Is it changing shape? Is it becoming twisted? Is it wavering? None of that happens. So the material world, yes, is Krishna, and we said this yesterday, we said it today, that it's all one, right? It's all Krishna. It is Krishna, yes. But then, like I said yesterday, we have to follow that statement immediately by saying it is not Krishna, in the way that if something happens in the material world which causes this place to become deformed in the many ways that it is, then that deformation does not affect the Supreme Lord himself. Krishna is not affected by that. The relationship between Shakti and Shaktiman, the possessor of the Shakti and the Shakti, the energy itself, that relationship is the relationship of Bheda Abheda, of difference and non-difference at the same time. In fact, all three of these energies are both different from and non-different to Krishna. The internal, the marginal, and the external. But they're distinguished by where the emphasis lies. Where the emphasis lies. In the internal energy, it is non-different from Krishna. We say that with emphasis. Oh, and yes, there are some differences too. Right? In this way, right? There are some slight differences. For the purpose of Leela, ekatmana vapibhuvipura deha bhedam gatauto. Radha and Krishna are one soul. But since the beginning of time, they have taken two forms for the purpose of Leela. Okay, so just we make a little bit of a distinction there. For the purpose of Leela, this has been done. But they are one. And here, with the external, the accent, the emphasis is on the difference. It's different than the material world. We are not the material body. Krishna's form is not material. And there's some oneness there too, right? The deity form, is it material or spiritual? Oh no, spiritual. This is Krishna, right? And yet, apparently made of things that were once material, like stone and brass and so on. So there's oneness there, and we know there's oneness, and we hear from Prabhupada that they are one, but yet the accent is on difference. Because there are so many things that are separated. And with us in the margin, it's kind of a little bit of both. One in quality, difference in quantity. That's how we explain it. It's similar in Krishna quality, but difference in quantity. That's not an explanation, by the way, that works very well for the external energy. We can't say, the external energy is similar to Krishna in quality, but different in quantity. No, it's different in quality and different in quantity too. It's just a fourth of the Lord's creation. And in terms of quality, no, Krishna is not Asat, Achit, Nirananda. In the internal energy, we can't really say similar in quality, different in quantity. It doesn't work there either, because it's similar in quality and similar in quantity. Who's going to say that Radharani has less beauty or less power than Krishna? It'd be a very risky thing to do. Right? So, internal, marginal, and external. The question is where the accent is on this. Now, the reason this is useful, the overall relationship between the energy and the possessor of the energy, is once again for the purpose of understanding Shastra or scripture. I'll remind you again that that is the only reason we are doing this. Otherwise, there's no point in doing it. Because Shastra provides the answer to these questions. That is, every Vedantist agrees on that. The only reason to develop a structure, our own structure to explain, is to explain Shastra, not to introduce a new idea that's not present in Shastra. So here's how it works, the ladder, okay? You've got a statement like the Upanishads say, very famous, Sarvam Khalvidam Brahma. This sarvam, all, khalu, indeed, idam, this world, is Brahman. It is divine, it's absolute. It is the absolute reality, Brahman. So, what do? We say, so this means the external energy. The external energy is in fact non-different from the Lord himself. Because the energy is non-different than the energetic. And we pass it up the ladder, and then if I still had that other one, I would show you, then you say Brahman, all this is indeed Brahman, so we're at the bottom of the other ladder, we keep passing it up. And we say all of this is actually Krishna's energy. This is what the statement is saying. Means this is all Brahman. How do we get from there to say this is all Krishna's energy? That statement doesn't say energy, it doesn't say Krishna or Bhagavan. It says Brahman. We've got two ladders to do the trick. The first one gets us to help us explain how this world is divine. Because it's the energy of the divine. And is there a difference between the energy and the energetic? No. And yes. But no, for our purposes now. Okay? And so we've moved it up this ladder. Now, Brahman, what do we do with that? Let's move it up the other ladder. And now we've got it to Bhagavan. Bhagavan is the source of Shakti. The Shakti is non-different than the possessor of the Shakti. Now we can explain this as a statement that this whole world is Brahman. It makes sense. It is Krishna's energy. And similarly, if we want, we can move statements in the opposite direction. We can talk about difference when necessary between Krishna and Srimati Radharani. We can talk about their oneness at other times when necessary. We can talk about how something that is part of the internal energy, like Krishna's abode, for example, is completely spiritual. It is Krishna. The Dhamma is Krishna. And yet, we can still say that it is different from Krishna, and that we have to relate to it in a way that's different in the way, in how we behave and how we, just like we wouldn't want to walk over Krishna, but we walk over the Dham. We understand that there's some difference there, even though there is oneness, there is unity. The deity is Krishna himself, and yet we also understand that there's some slight difference present there also. We have to take care of the deity in ways that acknowledge the fact that there is some little difference there. So the point is that oneness and difference, whenever we need it, we can access it to the degree that we need it. And if something is here, we're going to access oneness more and difference less. If something is here, we're going to access difference more and oneness less. But the other options are available when we need it. Let's hold just a few more minutes, okay? And then I'll ask for questions, just because we need to keep with the flow of the argument. Now, Jiva Goswami creates this ladder, which then resolves this question of this tension. What is the relationship of the world to God? All the miseries and all the problems present in the world, do they affect Krishna? Are they part of his nature? Well, yes and no. If we're talking about the world's troubles, then no, because the reflection does not affect the original source. But if we're talking about the world's source and its essential origin, then yes, it is part of Krishna, because nothing exists outside of Krishna as well. Each one of the acharyas, once again, creates a mechanism to deal with this issue, which is a very, very problematic issue. In fact, this issue is not unique to us. Any theistic system of philosophy has to deal with this problem. You know in the West what this problem is called? Reconciling God's nature with the world's? There's a very famous name for this problem. Not pantheism. The problem of evil. We put it like this, generally in the West. If God is all good and he's all powerful, why is there so much suffering in the world? Either he's not powerful enough to fix it, or if he is powerful enough to fix it, he doesn't do it, which means he's not good. Right? He's not good-hearted, he's not compassionate, he's not kind. And yet, Any religious, theistic system will say God is all good and all powerful. So how do we reconcile the nature of this world with the nature of God? It's the same problem. In the West, it's put in a little more of a, what's the word, in ethical language. By that I mean that the concern here is, why is God not doing the right thing? Right? So it's put in the framework of ethics, whereas here it's put in the framework of metaphysics. How do they exist is the question here, whereas why does God not behave properly is the question in the other one. But it's the same question, right? It's the same problem. It's a problem that any religious system that believes in a personal God has to deal with. Even an impersonal God has to deal with. Reconciling the nature of the world with our nature. So we're not unique in trying to address this problem. And as I'll show you in just a minute, we're not unique in trying to create a system of interpretation that actually reconciles these various issues. All the acharyas do it, and then one can venture off into Western philosophy and see how people do it as well. How do the other acharyas do it? Actually, there was one question. Any clarifications on what I just said about, yes? Where's the mic?
So you were, I understood the other parts of how you pass up the ladder from Brahman to Bhagavan.
Yes.
And Bhagavan to internal energy because of the non-difference between energy and energetic. I didn't follow the argument how you got from external to internal energy in this.
Yes. So I'm sorry. The arrow I made was actually incorrect. We're not passing it up this ladder or down this ladder. What we're actually doing is we're identifying the entire ladder with the Lord. So the energy is the same as the energetic. So we're saying that all three energies are non-different from the Lord.
Okay.
So thank you, actually, that's an important correction. We don't at any point say, well, we do, actually, not in that argument that I just made, but there are times where we say that the external energy is the internal energy. So, for example, when Prabhupada says that this microphone is being used in Krishna's service, therefore it is spiritual.
Right.
That's a passing of something up from the external to the internal energy ladder.
Mm-hmm.
The argument being that if you connect something close to Krishna, the difference between the three energies is only how far we're separating it from Krishna. So you take the external energy and you bring it right up close to Krishna, and now it's internal energy. Yes? So this is the idea behind deity, worship of the deity as well, is that what is apparently material is no longer material anymore. So we do, in that particular case, it wasn't a passing up the ladder, but passing it up and down the ladder is something we do. Actually just passing up the ladder. There's no point at which we take what is internal and claim that it is external. But the external often is useful for the internal.
Thank you, Prabhu.
Yeah.
Just last one.
Yeah, actually, Prabhu had his hand up for a while, and then we'll go to you.
So, Prabhuji, you talked about this evil thing. So, how in our philosophy God created evil is resolved, or how it is explained?
So this is the resolution, right? That it is the Lord's external energy. And the external energy is different enough where it provides space for us to create our own problems, to mess things up for ourselves, without it being the fault of God. Because it's different from God, it's separate from God. This is why the free will argument works. We work on our own free will, we create our own mess. If we were not able to separate the world from the Lord, like in India they say, not even a leaf moves without the desire of the Lord. Half the time when that statement is quoted, the point is, it's not my fault. Right? Because everything is happening because the Lord desired. But this doesn't let you escape like that, right? It says, no, the ladder is extended out. This is the reflection, and you're throwing the pebbles into the reflection. So this doesn't affect the Lord, and it's not he's not at fault for it either. Okay, so the purpose of extending the ladder is to allow space for the free will argument to work, to allow space for us to actually make our own mistakes. If we were all contained in that same one unified, powerful reality, like the Mayavadis say we are, then there's no space for us to make mistakes. We can't actually do anything, it's a fact, because everything is God. It's so closely connected to God that every problem is caused by Him, and it's His fault.
So, just one point that you've mentioned previously about Mahakavya. So, Mahakavya is the one, Mahavakya. So, Mahavakya is the one how Shankaracharya explains.
Yes.
And Ramanuja says give equal weights.
Yes.
And our is the ladder thing. That's
Yes.
how I.
But in terms of Shastric statements, Jiva Goswami agrees with Ramanujacharya that we need to give equal weight where it's properly, where it's merited. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So last question, and then we move on.
Hare Krishna Prabhu, thank you very much for this class. Is really amazingly going, very nice. So my question is, in the internal potency as well, we see kind of contradictions like, Radharani is eternal, yet she was born. God is eternal, yet we have Mother Yashoda, Devaki Vasudev. So those kind of contradictions as well, can that be addressed by this?
Not really. Those questions of why the Lord behaves in apparently material terms are not really part of this, because those are explained through the explanation of Leela. There's no, from the standpoint of Tattva or metaphysics, Krishna is not actually born, but he does this as a matter of Leela, right? So it's a different. What we're talking about here is that the material world is actually Krishna, and it's actually different from Krishna. You see the distinction here? So there's no, that lies in the realm of Leela. And the explanations that go into Leela are actually very different than the explanations that go into discussions of metaphysics or Tattva. And Jiva Goswami here in the first three Sandarbhas is very much not concerned with Leela, very minimally concerned with Leela.
Thank you very
much. Now, let's look at how some of the other acharyas do this, so you get a sense, a taste of how this works. Ramanujacharya, he, instead of using the sun in the sky example that Jiva Goswami gives, Ramanujacharya, he uses the metaphor of sharira shariri, which means the body and soul. Basically, he says, the material world is the body of the Lord, who is like the soul of the material world. So this is an analogy. Just like, he says, the body is dependent upon the soul for its existence, and in some sense, it's a product of the soul because of the soul's presence, it develops and it grows in the mother's womb and afterwards after that. In the way that the body is entirely dependent on the Atma for its operation and its existence. The minute the Atma leaves, the body is dead. And without the presence of the Atma, when the Atma desires something, the body has to comply. So, in all of those ways, the material world is also entirely dependent on the Lord. It's a product of the Lord's existence. And even though it is different in quality from the Lord. Okay? So just like all of these things hold between body and soul, and yet the body is not the soul. In fact, they have very different attributes. So in the same way, this material world is dependent on the Lord, it's coming from the Lord, it's so tightly unified with the Lord that you can point to the world and say it is Krishna and you wouldn't be wrong. So just like if I point to you and I say, this is Harivamsha. Now, I pointed to you and I said that. Now, technically speaking, if you follow my hand, all I'm pointing to is your chadar. And I'm just on the surface making the statement that the chadar is Harivamsha. But of course, we don't take it like that. We understand that when I'm pointing to the chadar, then included within that is the actual person himself, right? It's appropriate to speak like that because they're one unified whole. Or if I say, you are Harivamsa, you can say, no, I'm not Harivamsa, this is just my material body. I'm the spirit soul inside. And that would be an appropriate correction. But at the same time, my statement that you are Harivamsa is also not incorrect, because the body and soul are so closely tied together here, where your body is completely controlled by the soul, by you inside, that making that identification is in some way appropriate as well. So Ramanujacharya, he's saying that insofar as the world is tightly woven with the Lord, tightly connected with the Lord, it is okay to say Sarvam Kalvidam Brahma. It is all Brahman. It is all the Lord. That's okay. I'll give you another example. Here's in my hand a tangerine. Okay, you see it? Okay, so there's the tangerine. Now just imagine. I ask you, where's the tangerine? Point to the tangerine. Okay, just imagine I had it. Where is it? Okay, so you're all pointing to the tangerine, yes? Now, actually, better than this, why don't I give you all tangerines, okay? So here's tangerines. Everyone hold their tangerine in hand, okay? Now, do what I say. Point to your tangerine. Okay, there's the tangerine, right? Now, peel the tangerine. Okay, you've peeled it and put the peel down on the floor. And now, point to your tangerine. What did you just point to a minute ago? What's on the floor, right? Now you're pointing to what's up here. What, were you wrong the first time around? No, as long as that peel was tied closely to the tangerine, it was entirely appropriate to regard the entire package as the tangerine. But when separated out, the only thing that it's actually the tangerine is the pulp inside and not the peel, which is lying on the floor and will be thrown away. That's the relationship between the world and the Lord. The world is like the peel, okay, the body. And Krishna is like the tangerine inside. We point to this world. For the devotee, this is all Krishna, because he sees everything in connection with Krishna. So there's no material. The Lord is here. It's all spiritual. But as soon as we, the living entity, conditioned living entities, see the world as separate from the Lord, now we have to be very clear what we're pointing to. Okay? You are not this material body. Because we've got this vision, this distinction between the two. Right? So point is, as long as, again, that ladder we had, when you collapse the ladder, it's one thing. But when you pull it out, it's actually different. The peel, when it's there in Ramanuja system, when the peel is there with the tangerine, it's one fruit. You separate out the peel has no value now. Only the tangerine is the fruit, and that's just the peel. So this is body and soul. Ramanujacharya's system is in fact very, very similar to ours. His system was called Vishishtadvaita. And philosophically speaking, it's probably the most similar system to Gaudiya Vaishnava Achintya Bheda Bheda philosophy. And this is one reason why Jiva Goswami uses him more than any other Vedantist as a support for his arguments. He will, as I was saying yesterday, he will quote passages verbatim, sometimes very long passages, by giving us the first line and the last line of the passage as an indication of where you need to start reading in his commentary and where you need to end. And that's what's relevant for the argument I'm making here. So please go and refer to that. That's the extent to which he accepts Ramanujacharya's views again and again and again, in a way that he doesn't accept anyone else's that closely. He'll draw from everyone, but that close of a support you only find with Ramanujacharya. Very similar. Now, let's look at Shankaracharya. Shankaracharya is dealing with the same problem. His premise is that there is one reality, 100% non-attributed. It has no qualities, it has no shape, it has no form, it has no inside and no outside. It has no activity, it has no name. That one reality, and there are no two, it's just one, is simple in nature. What that means is that it has no parts, it has no energies, it has nothing it creates or produces. It's one simple whole. For him, the idea of Shakti Parinama, or the transformation of Shakti that we believe in, that is unavailable. Right? He can't accept that view, because that would mean that there's some variety within that reality. And that's what he started off by saying there wasn't. So, we still have the world, the problem of the world. Okay? And Shankaracharya develops this very interesting doctrine called adhyasa, which means superimposition. Like to superimpose, you take one transparency, put another on top of it, you're superimposing. So the world is a superimposition on Brahman. Now, what does superimposition mean? The best way to explain this is by an example. So, Jiva Goswami, we had the sun and the sun rays. In Ramanujacharya, we had body and soul. And the clementine was not his example. I just want to be clear. The tangerine, that was different. So, Shankaracharya has a key metaphor that he uses. Very, very famous. Anyone know what it is? He actually uses many metaphors. It's an unfair question to ask because he uses a lot. He's very good with analogies. But the most famous one is the rope and the snake, where he says this. So, one day you walk out your front door, one night, okay? You come out your front door to get the mail or something, and lo and behold, you see a coiled up snake on your front porch. And like every man in India will do, or woman, you scream at the top of your lungs and run inside and shut the door, okay? It doesn't matter how macho you are and what kind of a big guy you are. In India, one thing everyone is afraid of is snakes. So you run inside, you shut the door, and you stay there, and in the morning you come out again, tiptoe out, and lo and behold, it wasn't a snake at all. It was just a rope that was coiled up, and maybe your kids left it there the night before. And you think, and you pick it up and you put it in your garage. So, was there a snake there? Or a more difficult question, did you see a snake? Yes? So, did your vision of a snake have a real object to it? No. Was it a pure hallucination? Were you sick? Do you need to go to the doctor? To a psychologist? No. Yes and no, right? Not about the psychologist's part. You saw a snake and you didn't see a snake. Okay. Is the snake real? Well, no, because later on in the morning you realize there was no snake there. Is the snake completely unreal? No, because you saw it, right? And something that is 100% unreal, Shankaracharya says, cannot be the object of cognition. In other words, it cannot be the object of perception or of thought in any way. Like if I said, imagine a square circle. That's purely unreal because it cannot be the object of cognition in any way. Right? You can't think of it. But this wasn't like that. You actually saw it, right? So it's not unreal either. Shankaracharya says it is neither real nor unreal. That snake. That snake was a superimposition on the rope. You superimpose the idea of a snake on the rope, which is what you actually saw. Okay? You took that idea and you put it onto the rope. This whole world has been superimposed by us on Brahman, on God. We are confusing Brahman to be the world. Or we are seeing Brahman only, and yet we think it is the world. And one day, when the light is turned on, when it's daytime, when we receive knowledge, we will go out our front door and we will realize that this isn't the world at all. All this variety and all this activity and all this behavior, everything is just Brahman. It's that one unattributed, nameless, pure, formless reality. That's what it is. It's all a superimposition on Brahman. Convinced? And individuality just has to be, you just realize it's not there, right? It needs to go away. Another example he gives is the Ghatakasha example. There's a pot, and you look into the pot, there's space, there's sky there. And outside, there's also space. Actually, you might even think of it maybe better, well, let's just do it how he does it. There's sky around. So the sky in the pot is of the shape of a pot. And it looks like it's different. That space is different. But as soon as you shatter the pot, you realize it all was one space, right? It was one sky. There was no pot-shaped sky. There was no difference. It was just that because of that upadhi, that superimposition, that idea of the pot, right? That anartha, it looked different. And you shatter it, you realize it's all one. In the same way, we think we're different, we're individuals, but when you shatter that idea, you realize that you are Brahman. Many people think Shankaracharya taught that we become God, but he didn't. He also felt that was a very foolish idea. In fact, so-called representatives of the impersonalist school today, in India, it's very popular to say that I become God, or I will become God, or something. That's actually, everyone agrees that's a very foolish idea, right? But people don't, they still propound it. It's very, very ridiculous, actually. Even Shankaracharya would not stand by them. He would say, no, you are God. You just need to shatter that pot. You just need to wake up and see that it's not a snake anymore. Okay, now before everyone converts to Mayavad, let me, you cannot present Mayavad philosophy without presenting the refutation. So, continuing with our study of Jiva Goswami in the Sandarbhas presents some amazingly wonderful arguments against this perspective that demonstrate the weaknesses, the flaws in Shankaracharya's viewpoint. He draws, again, a lot of these from Ramanujacharya, who wrote a book called Saptavidha Anupapatti, 7 untenables, that is, internal contradictions in Shankaracharya's viewpoint. And Jiva Goswami takes many from those. He also adds a couple of his own. The first problem, the rope and the snake. What allows you to confuse the rope with the snake? What has to be true about both? Existence of the snake. Because a snake exists, that is the only reason that you go out and you confuse it with the rope. You're not going to go out and say, oh my God, a unicorn. Because if you know for a fact, or Santa Claus, because you know for a fact that unicorns and Santa Claus don't exist, that's not going to be an object of confusion for you. Right? It's only when you think that there's potential for something to exist. So, for one thing, he says, snakes exist, rope exists. That's the only reason you confuse A with B, is because both are existent in your own experience. What else has to be true in order to confuse A with B? Similarity. A has to look with similar to B, or not just look, in many ways it has to be similar. Again, you're not going to go out, see the coiled up rope, and think it's an apple. Because there's nothing similar to a rope and an apple. Okay? There's no properties that match in those. It's because of the fact that both ropes and snakes lie coiled up. This is the problem, right? This is what causes the confusion. Now tell me this, in Shankaracharya's system, what is the similarity between the world, which we are confused by, and Brahman, which we are confusing it with? We're confusing the world with Brahman, right? What's the similarity between the two? Nothing. right? So Jiva Goswami asks, how in the world is this confusion happening? You said you denied everything about the world, you denied that in God. You said he's got none of the qualities we see in the world. No variety, no name, no form, no qualities, no attributes, no hands, no feet, nothing. So where is this confusion coming from? How in the world can these two things be confused? Okay. But there's the third argument I'll give is really the nail in the coffin. There's others also. But the most important one is actually a very simple question. Who is confused? Who's seeing the snake? Right? Where does that confusion actually exist? So what's Shankaracharya's only option? Who's confused? Brahman, right? We started off with the premise that there was only one reality, and that was a completely simple reality. In other words, we could not introduce any distinctions of Shakti and marginal energy and none of that in him. So that means that that entity, that Brahman, who is completely Satchidananda, now all of a sudden, in him, in his very essence, has Asat, Achit, and Nirananda. Is temporary. In fact, not just confusion, but all the problems of the material world lie precisely within Brahman. And that's, of course, something that is completely unacceptable to Shankaracharya. But there's no place for it. Or in the pot and the sky example. Sure, the sky is Brahman, but the real question, what's the pot? Where did the pot come from? If you're going to say that Maya, this illusion, this confusion, the pot, is separate from the Lord, is separate from Brahman, then what do you have? You have two things, dualism. Now you cannot do Advaita anymore. You're not an impersonalist. And if you say it's the same, then you've got this problem of Brahman being all of these things we don't want it to be. Being temporary, being miserable, being ignorant. There is no place to put the world in Shankaracharya's philosophy. And therefore he says that the world is neither real nor unreal. It is anirvachaniya. This world is anirvachaniya, which means it is inexpressible, unexplainable. You can't say anything about it. Because if you say it's real, we've got all the problems we said. And if you say it's unreal, then what's the problem to begin with? What are we trying to gain liberation from? Where's the illusion? You cannot say either statement very clearly, neither real nor unreal. And so the world essentially, well, it disappears. He tries to make it disappear, but he can't say it's unreal either. Right? This is the problem. The world remains unexplainable, inexpressible. If you get a cold, a bad cold, one way to cure your cold is to cut off your head. And it has 100% success rate. Every cold is cured when you cut off your head. Every time. Right? It's finished. The problem's over. That's a solution. That's what Shankaracharya attempts to do. You try to make the world disappear, then the problem of the God in the world is no longer there. Right? But the problem is he can't even make the world disappear. Because if the world were to completely disappear, then the whole reason for doing philosophy is also gone, which is to achieve liberation from the world. Right? So it's really this horrible situation of trying to cut off your neck and not even being able to do it fully. Madhvacharya has such heavy things to say about Shankaracharya, it's incredible actually. We give him a little more kindness. We say that he's actually an avatar of Lord Shiva, come to spread impersonalism, to bring on Kali Yuga. Madhvacharya says, forget it, he is a demon, he says. And just like Madhvacharya, actually, he's one of the few acharyas who gives his own identity. He says, originally, he said, I am Vayu. This is my identity. And I serve the Lord in every avatar. As Lord Ramachandra, I came as Hanuman, Vayu Putra, Maruti Nandan. And I destroyed the forces of Ravana and these demons. I helped the Lord. In my second avatar, I came as Bhima, who is the son of Vayu. And I helped the Lord destroy the Kauravas and the demonic forces. In this avatar, I have come as Madhva. And I'm assisting Srila Vyasadeva in destroying the Mayavadis. So he doesn't give them any slack, actually. Now, this brings us to the final point here of the seminar, which is this anirvachaniya. Okay? The world is inexpressible. Now, we might say, looking self-critically, we might say, well, before we laugh too much at Shankaracharya, isn't it the case that we've also got inconceivability at the heart of our system? We call it achintya. And we're saying that the relationship between the Shakti and the possessor of the Shakti is one and different, and that's a contradiction, and it's inconceivable. So what makes our system any better than the other? Well, here's the difference. Anirvachaniya and achintya. First of all, the two major differences between them, before we talk about which is better. The two major differences between them is, first of all, the nature of the problem. With achintya, the problem is epistemological. What that means is, the problem is, how do I understand, how can I contain in my head two contradictory statements? The world is God and the world is not God. Shakti is Shaktiman and Shakti is not Shaktiman. These are contradictory ideas, and I can't hold them in my head properly together because contradictions the human mind doesn't deal with very well. That's an epistemological problem. It's a problem with our comprehension. Anirvachaniya, on the other hand, is not a question of what I can understand. Because I cannot understand, therefore it's an ontological problem. Meaning, is the world real or is it unreal? It's a question of existence. We don't have an ontological problem at all. If we ask the question, is the world real? We say, yes. Is Krishna real? Yes. Are his energies one with him? Yes. Are his energies separate from him? Yes. Every statement is yes. Now that ends us with contradictions, and that's why we have trouble understanding them, right? But there's no question of reality in our system. Everything is satyam. Everything is real. It's real, it's real, it's real, it's real. Difference is real, unity is real, the world is real, God is real, everything is real. With Shankaracharya, the question is an ontological one. Is it real or is it not real? We don't know. And in fact, this is another argument that Jiva Goswami gives against his idea. He says, when was the last time you've seen something that's neither real nor unreal? He said, why are you proposing ideas or concepts that have no access to experience whatsoever, that have no substance? Means we understand that Shastra gives us something that's beyond experience, but at least it's analogical. It's understandable through our experience. We have some sense, okay, we've seen mountains, we've seen gold, we can imagine gold in mountains. But why are you giving us something that is so unimaginable as to never be something that we can experience? Anyway, so the first is in the difference of the problem, epistemological versus ontological. The second difference is where the confusion, where the inconceivability is located. In the case of achintya, what is inconceivable? The nature of God. What is his relationship with his energies? Are they one? Are they different? The nature of God is inconceivable. In Anirvachaniya, what is inconceivable? the nature of the world around us is inconceivable. Is this world real? Is it unreal? Now ask this question to yourself. Where is it better to be confused? About the world around us or about God? Confusion about God is inconceivability about God is not only acceptable, it's necessary. It's required. Because if it were the case that we could know everything that there was to know about God and conceive of Him fully, He was not inconceivable, then that would mean we would be God. Right? Like you can take a computer, pull apart every part, its piece, and figure out exactly how it works. That's because you are greater than the computer. Your knowledge, your intelligence can completely cover, envelope the computer within it. If we could do that with God, if I could do that with God, it would mean I was God, right? By definition, something that is God has to be greater, not just physically, but also intellectually and mentally and emotionally, and in every way it has to be greater than everything else. That's just by definition. So every system of philosophy in the world, every system of theistic or religious philosophy in the world comes to a point of mystery, of inconceivability. This is something that you can study the world's religions and world's philosophies yourself and see for a fact. That whether it's Christians who talk about the unlimited mystery of God, or whether it's us who talk about Achintya, or whether it's Shankaracharya who talks about Anirvachaniya, everyone comes to a point of saying there is a point at which our mind must turn back because we are not the ultimate. There's no embarrassment in that. That's actually glorious. And this is the other thing. With Achintya and Anirvachaniya, not only are you, with Achintya, you're confused about the place or the person you're meant to be confused about. With Anirvachaniya, you take that which is plainly visible to the entire world, namely the world, that no one is apparently confused by, and you make it confusing for everyone. Huh? Someone who doesn't know whether the world around him exists or not is usually refers to a psychiatrist. Is that where we want our confusion to be? The world is confusing as it is, right? But then you put all the confusion located in the material world, which is the only thing we can actually touch and feel and conceive in this conditioned state. That's the wrong place to put inconceivability. When you put it in the Lord, not only is it necessary there anyway, but it's actually very beautiful also. Because the inconceivability of the Lord becomes the impetus for bhakti. When the devotee sees the inconceivability of Krishna, the devotee goes, wow, this is my Lord. He is one, and yet he's dancing next to every gopi. Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is one, and yet he's in every Sankirtan party dancing at Rath Yatra. This is my Lord. And in fact, this is the most common use of Achintya Shakti in our scriptures, is the devotee's wonderment at the Lord's ability to do things which are impossible to do, that are contradictory in nature. Jiva Goswami's favorite definition of Shakti as a whole, which I didn't tell you at the beginning because I think you can appreciate it best at this point. He says, Shakti is aghatana, ghatana, patiyasi, which means she who makes the impossible possible. That's our Lord. And so inconceivable is He that we actually want to worship Him. If you make the world inconceivable, you don't get anything as a result. It doesn't help anything. This is where we want to be confused, is in the realm of Achintya. So the devotee looks around at the world, he looks at Krishna, he looks at his activities, and he says, this is all Achintya Shakti. This is all inconceivable to me. And therefore, let me stop trying to figure the Lord out and offer my humble obeisances to Him. And say, you are my Lord, And as much as you would like to reveal yourself to me, please do so. And that's where philosophy ends. Right? That's the end point of philosophy. That's, in fact, what religion has over philosophy, is the point onward from there to say, okay, we did as much as we could. Now let's stop and let Krishna tell the rest. So we will stop here for that very reason. And thank you all so much for your attention. I'm sure we're out of time here, and so what I'll do is I'll stop here, and maybe if people have questions or further discussion, we can pursue it individually. But just in the interest of letting devotees continue with their services, and today's Sunday also, and soon I'll have a flight to catch also. So let's actually stop here. Please accept my humble obeisances.